In Samuel Richardson's Pamela, the title protagonist chooses to endure rather than escape from the sexual advances of her master, Mr. B. Mr. B's advances escalate from stolen kisses to attempted rape, even holding Pamela hostage at Lincolnshire. Nonetheless, Pamela remains incorrigible and chaste. Moved, Mr. B gives Pamela a sincere proposal for marriage, which she accepts. Pamela's marriage to a prosperous and reformed man seems a rightful reward to her virtue. But what if her virtue is feigned? What if her epistolary narrative is unreliable? After all, if she were truly repulsed by Mr. B's advances, why doesn't she escape Bedfordshire while she can? Is Pamela virtuous or hypocritical? I strongly believe that Pamela is virtuous, but she is not a paragon of virtue like what most pro-Pamelists herald her to be. She did not withstand Mr. B on grounds of her moral conscience alone. Pressure from her parents, pride to maintain her vows of virtue, and the shame, guilt, and embarrassment associated with succumbing to her base desires all reinforce her determination to stay chaste. Pamela has ambiguous feelings for Mr. B, and she copes by developing defense mechanisms that emphasize her feelings of hatred. But these mechanisms only suppress, not eradicate, feelings of love, which is why at times she seems inconsistent toward Mr. B. This does not make her hypocritical, but rather earns respect from those who understand the difficulty of emerging victorious from the struggles of moral ambiguity. Pamela's childlike innocence renders her incapable of the level of deception anti-Pamelists accuse her to maintain. Pamela evinces childhood naivety in Letter 3 when she guilelessly dismisses her parents' warning of the selfish nature of Mr. B's gift-giving, asking naively, "What could he get by ruining such a poor young creature as me?" A child incapable of suspecting evil is incapable of conscious deceit. Also, Pamela proves herself to be virtuous by consistently being considerate towards those around her. For example, after being assaulted by Mr. B in the summer house, Pamela initially refuses to involve Mrs. Gervais in the incident, lying benevolently that she only seeks Mrs. Gervais' company because she is afraid of spirits. Only under Mrs. Gervais' insistence does Pamela relent in Letter 12. Pamela's guilelessness is not an isolated incident, but a part of her character, as, even when she is kidnapped in Lincolnshire, does she naively lend Mrs. Jewkes all £5 worth of her money. Unsurprisingly, Pamela does not get paid back by the abusive Mrs. Jewkes. This is another revealing instance of her innocence and naivety by trusting someone who has proven to be untrustworthy before. Critics of Pamela's virtue interpret her behavior as affected, but it is unlikely for a 15-year-old country girl to be so good an actress. We have seen Pamela's parents' letters and can infer that Pamela had a puritanical upbringing. After all, her parents asserted in Letter 2 that they would sooner live upon the water and clay of the ditches they are forced to dig than to live better at the price of our dear child's ruin. Pamela may be able to fake her letters, but she cannot fake her parents' letters. It makes more sense that her parents are genuinely goading her to stay virtuous than that they are both upholding a facade of virtue. Another indicator of Pamela's ingenuousness is her taste in simple clothing. In Letter 24, Pamela writes that she enjoys simple and comfortable dress over elegant and stylish attire, preferring her black silk necklace over her French necklace given to her by Lady B. Some critics agree with Mr. B's judgment that Pamela is disguising herself to attract him, and thus being a complete hypocrite by dressing plainly but with the intentions of looking sensual. This view is illogical for simple reasons. Pamela never intended to be seen by Mr. B. Only under Mr. Gervais' officiousness does Mr. B run into Pamela. And, even if Pamela knew she would be seen by Mr. B, there would be no way to protect Mr. B's erratic behavior, which is outright disturbing, as represented by his assertion, "Why," said he, "you are very pretty, child. I would not be so free with your sister, you may believe, but I must kiss you." Some readers, like the scholar Stuart Wilson of the Modern Language Association, have suggested that Pamela cannot be a wily seductress, because while she may be able to feign the content of her letters, she cannot feign her style of writing. Indeed, Pamela's style of writing reflects her childhood innocence. Her diction, tone, and style all match her situation as a 15-year-old girl in a stressful situation. Her diction tends to be familiar, colloquial, and disproportionately monosyllabic, suited to the tense and frightening situation she is in. For example, she is truly upset over Mr. B's second sexual advance in letter 25, and her diction is charged with a litany of exclamations. "Oh, my dear father and mother, my heart's just broke," she says. "I have no patience left me." Her tone is passionate in a childlike way, because she thinks and judges in polar opposites. When Mr. B offers her gifts, she exalts Mr. B as the best of gentlemen in letter 1. But when Mr. B's prurient intentions become clear, Pamela compares him to Satan in letter 25. "You are Lucifer himself in the shape of my master," she says. Her narrative often lacks complex analysis, which makes it more genuine, because it is difficult to analyze traumatic experiences. For example, Pamela glosses over Mr. B's attempted rape in her entry for Saturday morning, the 36th day of her imprisonment, summarizing the entire incident with a single sentence: "He kissed me again, and would have put his hand in my bosom." Here her style is journalistic, dull in introspection, and perfectly apropos to a teenager writing in duress. Her figures of speech befit a 15-year-old of limited education and with 3 years of writing experience. In letter 16, she draws metaphors from Aesop's fables. Pamela is a new caught bird in a cage, a victim of the snares laid by Mr. B. She must have faith in her ability to survive by living like a bird in winter upon hips and haws, and she is like the grasshopper in the fable. Her evocation of imagery and allusions to children's fables reflect her juvenile and dogmatic understanding of morality. Other readers, like Robin Falkenflik of the Johns Hopkins University Press, defend Pamela's innocence by explaining her seeming moments of hypocrisy and inconsistency as natural reactions to severe distress. I agree with Falkenflik's overall interpretation that Pamela is not an infallible moral compass, but a struggling teenager fighting to obey the dictates of her conscience. She acts contradictorily at times because she is simultaneously opposed to and aroused by her natural desires engendered by Mr. B's crude approaches. Thinking that a marriage between Pamela and her master would be impossible because of the difference in their social stations, Pamela's parents prohibit her any kind of attachment to Mr. B. Thus, Pamela undergoes an internal conflict that pits her morals against her awakening need of a young girl for emotional and physical affection. To relieve this anxiety, Pamela forms defense mechanisms, one of which is reaction formation, in which Pamela opposes her real desire by claiming an aversion to it. When Pamela asks herself, "Why can't I hate Mr. B?" in her Sunday morning entry, Pamela reveals that she does not in fact hate Mr. B. It seems greatly contradictory for her to not hate her oppressor and seducer. This moment of seeming hypocrisy can be explained in terms of a defense mechanism that warps her socially unacceptable desires so that they can be accepted. This mechanism does not make Pamela hypocritical, as it is only because of her sincere desire to be virtuous that the mechanism exists. Defense mechanisms also explain why Pamela does not leave when she has the chance to. Wanting to stay with Mr. B, she rationalizes that she needs to work to stay and finish the waistcoat, because she never did a prettier piece of work. In her postscript of letter 19, again, one cannot call Pamela a hypocrite, because it is her subconscious, driven by a strong and real desire to be moral, that creates these defense mechanisms. Anti-Pamelists are also incredulous about her ability to faint seemingly on cue, but again, it is a simple physiological reaction to a stressful, overwhelming circumstance. Try to comprehend a teenage girl's feelings as her trusted friends, one by one, betray her, or are fired, or punished by Mr. B. Mrs. Gervais is relieved of her duties. John reveals that he has been selling to Mr. B her letters, and Mr. Williams is assaulted by armed robbers. Her former allies are replaced by abusive, intimidating, or distant servants. Mrs. Jukes is a wicked and a broad, squat, pursy, fat thing, while Cobrand is a giant of a man for stature. The people that surround Pamela stifle her, and they make her so uncomfortable and paranoid that she misperceives a cow grazing grass as witchcraft, in which Lucifer is in the shape of a nasty, grim bull. It is no wonder, then, that Pamela faints so often, as the undercurrent of prolonged fears is amplified to a breaking point by Mr. B's sharp advances. The final question, then, is, why does Pamela continue to write when as early as letter 26 she knows that her master reads her letters? She has written letters to her father and mothers and others, as far as I know, quoting Mr. B. Well, this can be explained as a necessity for a teenager who has no other outlet for expression. For those who have no reliable companions, writing becomes an instinct. Expression is a necessary trait for humans. That is why solitary confinement is considered by many to be a severe punishment. Expression is like breathing, and Pamela, having a decreasing number of people to communicate with, can only resort to writing. Again, it is logical that Pamela continues to write in hope that her master respects her privacy. Her behavior is also consistent with her naivety of trusting people to do the right thing. Nonetheless, it is important to acknowledge that the Pamela at the beginning of the novel is not the Pamela at the end of the novel. Pamela does develop some amount of worldly sophistication as a result of her coping with the treachery of someone 10 years her senior. For one, she chastises Mr. Loomis for being so open with Mrs. Jukes, and demands to know what he has told her. But her guile is defensive and protective, rather than offensive and malevolent, and so that does not make her less virtuous. Ultimately, Pamela is an innocent and genuine girl who has intentions to remain virtuous. Whenever inconsistencies in her narrative arise, it can be explained in terms of the pressure she experiences that enable conflicting subliminal instincts to surface.